So, I have now completed the battle with the Demon of Hatred on the Demon Doll mode on record. Having done this, I now have some thoughts about the boss fight itself and its importance to Sekiro's gameplay and story. So I wrote down some notes here. I'm just going to lightly go over them and kind of talk over them a bit. The first note that I had is that the sculptor had a kunoichi he loved, and losing her is what in the end drives him to become a Shura. Absent what he loves, he has no reason to exist other than to attempt to satisfy the never-ending desire to kill. And what that means is that the pain of losing what he loved becomes an anger of hatred that is the source of the demon's great strength, representing his hatred's power being a replacement for the love he had previously. This is represented by the flaming arm of the demon of hatred. Thus, his source of strength is simultaneously the reason for his pain. Then, the sculptor gives him the desire to kill, again absent a reason to exist, when carving Buddha no longer satisfies his hand's thirst to shed blood. So, the ending of this sculpting represents the inevitability of death, and perhaps the futility of desire itself, since sculpting the Buddhas only delayed his descent into Shura rather than preventing it entirely. So, the sculptor suffers a desire to die, combating his fear of dying. His desire to die is motivated by his want to unite with his kunoichi in the afterlife, but he is unable to end his own life due to the fear of death more than desiring it. This is what leads to his becoming the demon, because once Ashina is soaked in war, killing calls the sculptor to finish his destiny and fulfill his karma to become the demon of hatred as punishment for a lifetime of bloodlust. And Ashura is a person who fights an endless war, either within or without, and struggles in a violent sadomasochistic joy of causing harm for the sake of causing harm. It is probably the epitome and very definition of extreme antisocial behavior. So the sculptor's sin is ultimately hatred, since he lost the one he loved. Life became a meaningless exercise in killing for the futility of it. Thus, hatred consumes his heart and turns him into the demon of hatred, as he was never able to love either himself or life ever again following the death of his lover. Thus, the fight with the demon of hatred isn't just a battle of will, attrition, or even a desire to win. Instead, the fight is the symbolic culmination of all of Sekiro's themes and symbols regarding the futility of violence and the nature of benevolent compassion. See, at the beginning of the game, you're given a sword, and this sword is what you will use for the entire game. It is called Kusabi Maru, and on the blade, it says, "Even a shinobi must not forget mercy." What that means is that even somebody who is as low as the shinobi, basically an assassin, must not forget that they can practice mercy. Okay, why this is important is because the demon represents violence's futility. Because no matter how much he kills, it is never enough to satisfy the pain of his hatred, burning his body and soul. Thus, Sekiro must by karmic retribution become the embodiment of compassionate mercy, as well as bravery, to kill the demon of hatred, as only the inverse of the demon can possibly kill it. That being a merciful, compassionate soul who understands the demon is in pain and desires an end to his suffering once and for all. Now, this is karmically aligned since the sculptor is responsible for saving and literally rearming Sekiro. So, Sekiro owes the sculptor a life debt, and what that means is that it's his responsibility to kill the sculptor once he becomes the demon of hatred, and thus fulfill his life debt, because then the suffering of the sculptor is ended. Thus, the battle with the demon of hatred is symbolic representation of the end of violence being the choice of mercy. That mercy being to end a demon's life rather than prolong its suffering and thus enable it to further kill. By denying Shura, Sekiro makes the choice to serve his own code as defined by himself and his master. This returns his value of living to him after he defeats Owl, who tempted him into going Shura. And so Sekiro is able to serve a higher calling than himself, severing the divine heir's immortality and finding a way to return the dragon's divine right of tears to the west. So, unlike the sculptor, Sekiro had a reason and motivation to remain human, and thus never gave in to the temptation of Shura. So, the sculptor gives in to the temptation of Shura because he has no reason to live, and as a desperate bait to satisfy his own internal suffering and loss. Thus, when we fight the demon, we cannot approach him the same way he does us, which is as a mad and terrified, frightened beast that is acting on pure instinct and battle memory out of a fear of dying. Instead, the battle must demand that we are karmically and symbolically true to be aligned with the game's themes. Thus, we are to fight the demon without any hatred, fear, resentment, or hesitation. This is difficult because the demon is the hardest boss in the game. Thus, our continual deaths upon his fight might motivate us to get angry, to hate and resent him for our victory's sake, as we struggle in vain to fight him out of fear. The fear of the demon of hatred is that he's the representation of our own internal suffering and what motivates us to harm others or ourselves. We fear this creature because it is within us and it is powerful, but the irony is that the demon fears Sekiro far more than Sekiro can fear the demon, precisely because Sekiro has remained human, where the demon became the hatred that he embodies. So, I turned everything over to ChatGPT and I wanted to get his opinion, right? And this is what he said. The sculptor's fall to Shura is a cycle of despair, because losing his kunoichi wasn't just a loss, it was the death of his purpose. Without her, sculpting Buddhas became a delay rather than a salvation. So, his hatred became his strength, and his strength became his curse. The flaming arm is a visual metaphor for the burning pain of loss fueling his existence. Violence begets violence, and without love or purpose, all that's left in life is war. So, the true nature of Shura is as sadomasochistic nihilism. The epitome of antisocial nihilism, not just war for the sake of survival, but war for war's sake, is that the ultimate sin of the sculptor wasn't just killing, it was hatred of life itself, which poisons its soul to the point that even its own survival is just a hollow cycle. So, Sekiro is the embodiment of compassion and mercy, becomes the killer of the demon of hatred, so that he can free him. His karmic debt is repaid whenever a sculptor is killed, because Sekiro repays his life debt by ending his suffering. This isn't an act of revenge, it's an act of grace and mercy. Sekiro doesn't defeat the demon through strength, he does it by being his opposite, fearless, merciful, and steadfast. So, the meta-narrative surrounding Sekiro and the fight with the demon of hatred is that fighting hatred without becoming it is the entire point of the boss fight. As in, the demon of hatred is the hardest boss because he tempts us to hate. Our deaths in battle trigger frustration, anger, and resentment, which mirror the sculptor's descent into Shura. So, the true victory isn't just about winning the fight, it's about doing so without letting the fight corrupt you. And so, the fear of the demon of hatred is the fear of our own suffering, but the demon himself fears Sekiro's resolve even more. Now, I think that what that means is that the demon of hatred is like the past clinging to us and telling us that what we have now has no value because it's not as good as what came before it. And that's the pain of loss. That's why his arm is gone. It's because Ishii and Ashina cut it off to prevent him from becoming what he would eventually. But it was just delaying the inevitable. That's all the sculptor's life has been. He became the demon of hatred because the loss of his love was inevitable, and he could never accept it. And so he was always going to become the demon no matter what anyone did. It doesn't matter if Ishii Ashina cuts off his arm. It doesn't matter if he sculpts Buddhas till the end of the world, because the fact is that one day, war will come to Ashina and he will become a killer again. And by then, the only thing that can kill him is Sekiro. So, here's my final thoughts about this boss fight, and why I think it's now my favorite boss fight probably in any game. Symbolically and thematically, it is probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever played, even though it's probably also one of the most difficult. I've played some pretty hard games in my life, but I think Sekiro with the Demon Bell mode on probably takes top spot for me. I know there's like shoot-em-ups that are harder, but I like Sekiro. And I think the reason why the Demon of Hatred is such a hard fight is because we're scared of him. I mean, even if you're not scared of games, like if you're somebody who can like, oh, I don't care about a video game, it's just pixels on a screen, blah, blah, blah. Look, even if you're like that, go fight the Demon of Hatred and try to fight him without giving into the fear of him, okay? Because that is really hard. As in, when I was fighting him, half of me was terrified I was going to make a mistake and die instantly. And the other half knew that if I gave into that, it would happen. And that's exactly what the fear is that the demon has. The demon has the exact same fear we do, which is that if he gives in to any single moment of weakness, Sekiro will kill him. And he knows that. And while he simultaneously desires it, his fear of death is greater than his desire to die. That's why killing him is a mercy. That's why it's the best boss fight I've ever played. And that's why I think it's a great game. Sekiro is a fantastic game, and I think it'll be played for years to come. I don't think there's many games like that, but I think Sekiro is one of them. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Those are my thoughts about Demon of Hatred. I hope that one day you take him on with the demon bell, because if you can do it, then you can probably beat anything in a game. But thanks, ladies and gentlemen. That was Mio. I love you all. Peace.